We continue with our Lenten reflections for here now, the first Sunday of the Lenten season. And the subject of our scriptures really is the whole area of temptation, inviting us to reflect on the area of temptation in our life. First of all, with the reading from the book of Genesis, the temptation of Adam and Eve, the fall of man, as we call it. And then in the gospel, the temptation of Jesus himself, who, having been led into the desert, was fasting for 40 days, after which he was hungry. And of course, that in that moment, the evil one shows up. It is the case that we're often tempted in times when we're at a point of weakness. And you can think about that weakness when Jesus was tempted, first of all, bodily, that he was hungry. And we often talk, maybe you've heard this idea of when we're hungry, angry, when we're lonely or tired. Halt is the short end of that. When we're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, the evil one often shows up in a moment of weakness. In this case, Jesus, very hungry after fasting, and he shows up. He was also tempted spiritually to doubt God's goodness, to test the Lord in some way, and spiritually, in a sense, to almost mistrust the Lord. This is also the case for all of us, that there are times when we just aren't sure. And if we give ourselves over to that doubt, it can grow in our hearts. So we have to be very careful not to entertain doubts and trying to dismiss them when they come. Thirdly, Jesus was tempted materially. And how often it is that we want some kind of immediate gratification versus the heavenly reward. And the temptation for Jesus here was certainly the case as well. If you just bow down, I'll give you all of this kingdom, if it were, all this property and all that goes with it. Temptation is a part of human life, and there's nothing we can do about that. It's the effects of the fall of Adam and Eve, as we heard. But we all want comfort. And so look, all advertising is based on what pleases the senses. It's the easiest way for the evil one to deceive us. Temptations in terms of our bodily senses is always a first recourse of the evil one, if you will. So we don't have to bemoan all of that. We just have to admit it's so true. So often we are, in fact, tempted in our senses. But we're also tempted in terms of spiritually, not only to doubt the Lord, but to want to have it our way. We would rather be in charge, you might say, than let God be God. And in so that regard, I call it the temptation to manage our own happiness. I can make myself happier than God can make me. This is a primordial lie. It is from the very beginning. The evil one says, if you eat this, then you'll be like gods. See, God's deceiving you to doubt God, and how often this happens in our life. And so we would rather, in fact, be in charge of our own happiness than receive it from the Lord, because we doubt his goodness and his generosity in our lives. And then, of course, third temptation, would prefer hands down material wealth to spiritual blessings. We'd rather have possessions and popularity and praise rather than to honor the one who is all good and deserving of all our love. And so when it comes to these immediate satisfactions, we kind of put off the eternal reward for the immediate way in which we can have these things. It is in our culture today very difficult to resist material things, to resist popularity or endure a lack of popularity, in some ways almost to be ostracized. And it is also very challenging, I think, to want praise and affirmation and accolades, and rather to go without that in a sense. We crave after those things so much. Temptation is not the only trick, if you will, of the devil, but it's a common one. There are others include, the 7 deadly sins, pride and anger, envy, greed, lust, gluttony, sloth, and so forth. The evil one works through fears and through discouragement, through doubts as well. But oftentimes it is all of this going on in a given day in our life that we just think this is part of normal life. But in fact, it's a way in which the the evil one is operating in our minds and hearts. And so as a bit of encouragement to conclude this today, I'd like to encourage you to just this Lent, know yourself. Take some time to notice your patterns of thinking, the patterns of speaking, the behavioral patterns of acting, what you typically do. Examine your routine, you might say, and notice when you do what you do and why you do it, what you say and what you say and why you say it, and even your patterns of thought. What comes up when you hear one thing or another that might set you off, you might say in some way. So notice your patterns of thinking, speaking, and acting. The other thing I want you to do in all of that then is maybe try and do a 10-minute daily examine at the end of the day. As we say it at Mass, in my thoughts, in my words, and what I've done, what I failed to do. Look at yourself in terms of what did today look like along those lines. And then maybe perhaps some place, where you can keep it private, write that down. Today I noticed in my thoughts, in my words, what I've done, what I failed to do. And by the end of the week, I'm pretty sure you're going to notice patterns in thinking, speaking, and patterns of acting. And you might see where temptations have arisen and where you've given in to them. And therefore, it might lead then to an honest confession. If we notice the patterns all week and do an examination of them, we might be drawn to say, Lord, this is the real me, and make a true apology, a sincere confession. And in that regard, we'll now begin to root out some of those faults, sins, weaknesses, and temptations, because simply put, we're noticing those patterns. Temptation is real in our life. How we address them is also an important part of Christian maturity. And so in this week ahead, I invite you just to reflect on your patterns, know yourself, and review your life regularly. And at that point, notice where maybe perhaps we need to apologize in confession and allow the Lord to give us a new grace to move forward, to know, love Him, and serve Him as He's called us to from our baptism. Enjoy this week of Lent as the Lord reveals more and more about your heart to Him as we try to, in our hearts, return to the Lord in this Lenten season. God bless you.